I gotta. Okay, here you go.
In frame. Okay, so I'm Josh, and I'm going to talk about a couple of different things. First of all, my own experience, what I've been tracking, and kind of some conclusions that's led me to realize about this sort of psychology of tracking yourself and what I'm trying to build to help other people do that. So to start, just very briefly, how many people know what I mean when I say API? Is that going to be okay?
You should still explain it though.
So an API is an application programming interface, which is really just a long way of saying it's a way for programmers to make apps talk to each other. And any kind of software will have this at some level. And so that's going to be kind of the second part of what I talked about, basically building a personal API. So the first part is my own experience. That's me in June of 2011. So that was where I was weight-wise. Just graduated. This was me on like day one of my Quantified Self journey, let's call it. And that was January 2012. And I was about 100 pounds heavier than I am now. And the biggest thing I found was that frictionless automated tracking is extraordinarily motivating. So I bought a withing scale, which is a wireless scale I'm sure many of you are familiar with. There's a similar one from Fitbit. Basically you step on it, it records how much you weigh, and it goes off to some server in California, which you can then retrieve the data thereof and examine. So I signed up for a bunch of different sites and different apps, and kind of over time figured out that the most powerfully motivating thing for me was the visualization of the data. So there's this awesome, just totally free app called Trendweight. That's all of my data. It's 18 months or so worth of data, and every day I would do something like this and check it really obsessively. So you can see lately I've been really lazy, but over the full time period I've made some considerable progress, I think. So the most powerful thing to me about this is that I have a reference point continuously of where I'm at. So it wasn't sufficient for me just to have frictionless data available. And by frictionless I mean I didn't have to actively record it. I didn't have to sit down and say, okay, what was my weight today? I just stepped on the scale every morning when I woke up, and that was it. And so when I got the data, actually seeing it was really important. And seeing it in relation to where I had been 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 2 months, 3 months, was continuously motivating because I was making progress. And so that encouraged tracking, which encouraged myself to keep going, etc. And so I started getting interested in other ways of visualizing this data, which led me to look at what the kind of internals of these hardware devices actually were, because I wanted to operate on the data myself. I wanted to do calculations and visualizations of all the things I was tracking. And so I started looking at the APIs and realized, hey, these are actually really bad. For a programmer, they kind of suck to work with. The wireless scale I was using in particular is really awful. And so that was kind of hard. And as I started tracking meals and other things, I realized I was putting my data in different places. And so doing any kind of comparative analysis or comparative visualization on the data was actually really tough, because it was locked into one place, and if I wasn't using the same provider for everything, then I was really out of luck. So the only way to overcome that was to look at the APIs and then organize them into one space. So the project that I've been working on is an open source project, which anyone can download and run. It's free as in speech and beer. And it's called Quantified.io, and I'll just log in. And basically, it is a single point of reference for me for all of my data, which isn't that much yet. I think there are some like really crazy people out there, but I'm only really seriously tracking weight and meals at this point. I want to start tracking location as well. But this is basically my personal dashboard, and it tracks my latest 7 weight points, what my BMI is, body fat, lean mass. Those are just rough estimates coming from the scale, and then just averages of calorie intake. So you can see that I've been working too much and haven't eaten enough in the last 3 days. But underlying all of this is an API. So if you're a programmer, you might like the look of this. For example, I can just pull up a JSON document of all of my meals, and it's normalized data. It's got my calorie intake, carbohydrates, fat, protein, the percentage breakdown per meal, and I can organize and group those by date. So I can know how many carbs I took in on last Wednesday, something like that. And I can do the same thing, of course, with all of the weights I have. And this data is coming from the Livelinks API, and I'm just consuming it every time I log in. And I've also got the Fitbits API integrated, and hope eventually to integrate basically anything I can get my hands on. And ideally normalize it into a nice structure like this, such that any programmer or kind of hacker type will be able to do analysis on their own data. So just kind of lastly, so I'm still manually tracking my meals, which kind of sucks, but this is kind of what I built, and it's API all the way down, so I can actually individually call up any given meal and manipulate that data in whatever ways I want. So yeah, that's what I built, and again, it's open source, so I think there's a link here. If not, it's on GitHub. You can just search for Quantified. You can run it yourself, or there's not an actual sign up for this because I kind of want to encourage people to run it themselves. But eventually, I'll let other people sign up if they're willing to trust me with their data. So yeah, that's a mouthful, but any questions? Yeah?
Yeah, so let's say I eat the sandwich right now.
Yeah.
So how does the nutritional information about the sandwich?
Right. So this is something I've been thinking about, but basically right now it's very friction-full. So I have to manually track it. And I'm not really sure how to overcome that. At various points, I've tracked using other apps. I think one of them was loseit.com, which had a really cool barcode scanner. So if you ate something, you just scan the barcode. But the problem with that is that there's a tendency among people who track a lot of this data not to consume things with barcodes on them. So it quickly becomes like just totally useless to anyone who's actually tracking a lot of this data, because you're way more likely to be some kind of health nut, let's say, or at least be very interested in healthy food. So yeah, I'm not really sure how to solve that problem. I think maybe photographing, but even then, like, you still have to remember to do it. So right now, my thought process has been on reminding. So one of the things I've been thinking about is a text reminder every night, so that I can just reply back with like 4 numbers. That was my estimated calorie, and here's the macro breakdown, and that would be enough. And then if I missed it for a couple of days, maybe it would somehow escalate. Maybe it would post something on Facebook, and then like something embarrassing that would then make me go back and actually do it. One thing I've noticed just on that topic is that when I don't track, I very quickly lose sight of, I stop practicing the habit I was tracking. So tracking is in itself for me the enforcement mechanism to actually engage in the habit in which I'm trying to track, which is kind of interesting. Like if you see, if you go back to here, you'll see this very clearly. You'll see that I have like these spikes, right? And they occur because I wasn't tracking for a certain amount of time, which means that I wasn't being very conscious of what I was eating, and so I gained weight. And that's an interesting relationship. But yeah. Anyone else? Back there? Yeah.
So obviously good progress, excellent results. How do you actually lose weight? Like once you're motivated, is it diet, exercise?
So I've tried so many things that it's kind of ridiculous. But the single most effective thing for me was tracking food intake and just limiting food intake to a caloric deficit. In addition to that, have spent a lot of time with various extreme dieting techniques. Like I think one of these might be related to that, which is the 8-hour diet, which is like you do fasting and then intermittent fasting basically. So I've experimented with that. I've experimented with various low carb stuff, especially the keto diet. But the single most effective thing was just tracking my intake and then weighing myself, because then I could see it actually working week to week. Yeah.
I really love the dashboard that you have there. Sure. One question that I have is whether you've given some thought to how you might indicate on the dashboard the kind of freshness of those numbers, because there's some things that might not have been updated for some time.
Yeah. So I happen to think this is actually really bad at visualizing. So it is neat looking, but I've mostly been spending time with the data underlying it and haven't really had a lot of time to spend on representing it in, I think, effective ways. So I actually don't really like this at all as far as the ways in which it can powerfully and meaningfully indicate progress or freshness or quality of data, accuracy, for example.
What are those, now that I look at it, what are those kind of donut shaped?
So these are percentages. So the donut chart corresponds to the percentage with the highlighted area. I mean, obviously, like this doesn't make any sense, right? Like this one, until you realize, oh, that's actually a total of that. But this is just a quick kind of first stab at what I'm kind of aiming for. But yeah. Yep.
In your kind of audit of the various devices and APIs out there, which in your opinion is the best, and are there any on the horizon that you're excited about?
Yeah, so Fitbit is pretty good. The Nike, which one's the Nike Fuel Band is okay, but you have to apply for a developer's account. You can't even just directly access it. That really sucks. Don't want that. Withings terrible. The reason Withings is so bad is because the documentation barely exists. So it's just stumbling all over the place. What else is good? Once you get into more location data, you can get some really awesome stuff out of Foursquare, for example. That's just really polished. I took a look at the Jawbone, what's it called? Up. It's okay. It's a little more recent. So there's some sense of best practices built in. But I don't think anyone has really made it easy. And certainly if you're a non-developer who's approaching this maybe for the first time as like, a first programming task, it can be really daunting to manipulate data. And I think that's a shame because when they're well designed, APIs are actually really usable. And they should be usable by people who are just learning. So yeah, I think it's overall a crappy space. Hopefully the guys from Push do a good job of theirs and make it a cool API. But yeah, I would say overall, none. I did a really great job. Maybe Fitbit is pretty good. But yeah.
I was curious about when you started your presentation. You were saying like this was where you started, and obviously this is where you are now. So, what I was curious about, like, what is it that got you from that place to going into tracking and then moving into the weight loss that you have gone through? Like, and prior to that, were you tracking then, and was tracking like the eureka moment for you, or?
Yeah. So tracking, absolutely. So tracking.
So you weren't tracking at all previously?
I was tracking 0. This was the first day I tracked.
Okay.
So this was like the first photo I took that was deliberate, and I was consciously weighing myself.
Okay.
And that corresponds to the very first data point I have.
Like the top end of the red there. Okay.
Roughly. I don't know if trend weight itself goes all the way back, but
Okay.
it's really close.
Okay.
And so tracking was absolutely instrumental in that process. Like, I didn't have any serious attempt before that of that kind of, certainly the degree of transformation. Yeah, tracking was the most significant thing. Like beyond even just like eating right. Like tracking, I would say, was the thing that actually made me eat right.
And yeah, just curiously, like, was it the visualization of the data itself combined with the photos of yourself, or strictly the visualization of?
Yeah, I have a lot of photos that like probably shouldn't go on the internet. So I mean, I'm comfortable showing them to people. So if you're really interested, I can show you lots and lots of photos, and they're not like bad photos or anything, but just that show progress in that way too. They were important as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you charted other things along with that, like budget, how much you spend on food?
Interesting you mentioned that. So around the same time, I started doing financial tracking as well. I just graduated, had a lot of debt, and basically did the same thing. More manual process there, used Mint, not a lot. But again, found basically a line graph where it just went down was hugely motivating, and over the same period, I paid my student debt off using essentially the same technique. Yeah.
It occurred to me, you remarked before about the awkwardness in, with respect to diet, using a barcode. It occurred to me that if you can assume that you eat at home all the time, and let's say you eat at home all the time and you live alone, and then you could use the, when you go grocery shopping, like the barcode of all the items there.
Yeah.
And see the caloric weight of an order of groceries.
Yeah, there's actually a USDA API that gives you like normalized versions of what like an orange is, for example. So if I search on Google, actually, orange is terrible. Tuna. If you search for tuna, apologies to any vegans, then you'll see on the side here that it has a breakdown. And this is actually coming from a source that you can just download the Excel file for this from the USDA. It's called the SR25 guide, and I use this all the time to make that possible. So maybe I could make it easier to reference that in some way, or I could keep like a library version of the things I eat and then just refer to them constantly. It's really sloppy right now.
I mean, what I'm saying is maybe the grocery receipt has all those barcodes.
Oh, that's true, it does.
Scan the grocery receipt.
Yeah,
so rather than focusing on when you put it in your mouth, when you
maybe
buy
it's
it,
just that's a good
and then make some type of adjustment to reflect the amount of wastage that happens.
Right.
What fraction of the food you consume.
That's a good idea. I've probably gone way over my time, so just stop me at any point.
Yeah, I guess, if you're feeling done.
Is there any other questions? I saw.
Yeah, I'm very curiosity. Now that your line is down and it's not so motivating anymore, it's like, oh, it's going up.
Yeah.
Do you feel like maybe after 2 years you internalized what you needed to learn about eating? Maybe you could just let go of the quantification?
So there's this excellent analogy that a philosopher known as John Searle uses to explain why computers can't think. It's called the Chinese room experiment, thought experiment. Basically, it goes that computers thinking is sort of equivalent to someone translating a Chinese sentence by individually looking up the characters in a book of a reference book, and then writing out the corresponding meaning, and then handing it back to you. Like, that person doesn't speak Chinese. So in the same way, they're capable of looking it up in a book. So in the same way, I don't feel like I have internalized it. All I've done is actually just made myself dependent on the tracking in a way. So, which is just kind of weird, and maybe, I don't know if, I don't think that I'll ever be able to, I don't think I'll be able to maintain without tracking. And I certainly have experienced that as, like, I've entered more of just a maintenance phase. I'm just trying to maintain where I'm at. Tracking, anytime I stop tracking, I gain weight right away. So maybe I'll never be able to stop it. Anyways. Is that it?
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.